The diner was small but cozy, the kind of place where regulars knew the staff by name and new visitors felt welcome the moment they walked through the door. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with sizzling bacon filled the air, and soft chatter and clinking dishes created a familiar background hum. It was the middle of a busy weekday afternoon, and the lunch rush had brought in a steady flow of customers. Behind the counter, a young waitress moved with practiced ease. She had been working there for a few years and had learned how to keep multiple tables happy at once, balancing trays of food while remembering who wanted extra ketchup or a refill of coffee. Her smile was genuine, and even when the diner was crowded, she managed to greet every customer warmly, making them feel like more than just a number. On this particular day, there was an unusual tension in the air. The usual customers had come and gone, and the diner was now filled with people chatting, working on laptops, or enjoying their meals. Among them, a biker walked in, someone who immediately drew attention. He was tall and broad, dressed in leather with tattoos that peeked out from under his sleeves. His demeanor was loud and commanding, and the instant he entered, it was clear he expected people to notice him. He didn't just walk to a table, he claimed one as if it were his territory, leaning back in his chair and placing his helmet on the table with an air of ownership. The waitress approached him with a polite smile, taking his order. She tried to make small talk, asking how his day was going and if he wanted any specials. At first, he responded with brief, gruff answers, but as he waited for his food, he began to grow impatient. The waitress, trying her best to keep everything in order, accidentally brought the wrong drink. Instead of coffee, he received tea. She realized the mistake immediately and offered a sincere apology. "I'm so sorry, sir. Let me fix that for you right away," she said, her voice steady but polite. That should have been enough, but the biker was not interested in understanding or patience. He raised his voice, attracting the attention of other diners. "Are you kidding me? This is what I get for coming here? How hard is it to bring the right order?" He snapped. His words echoed across the diner, and suddenly the warm, friendly atmosphere felt cold and tense. The young waitress felt her face flush with embarrassment. She had been trained to remain professional no matter what. But there was a sinking feeling in her stomach that made her question herself. The customers around them exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some tried to look away, pretending not to notice, while others whispered quietly to each other. The waitress took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. She had dealt with rude customers before, but the intensity of the situation was different. It wasn't just impatience. It was deliberate humiliation. The biker leaned back in his chair, smirking as if he enjoyed watching her struggle. "Come on, lady, is it too much to ask for a coffee? Maybe I need to write it down for you," he jeered. The words cut deeper than he might have intended. She felt a mix of frustration and fear, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the tray she was carrying. Her coworker, a fellow waitress who had been working at the diner longer, came over to offer quiet support. "It's okay, just stay calm," she whispered. "Don't let him get to you." The young waitress nodded, trying to hold back tears. She returned to the biker's table, placing the correct drink in front of him with as much composure as she could muster. "Here you go, sir." "I'm very sorry for the mix-up," she said politely, hoping he would finally be satisfied. But the biker wasn't done. Instead of accepting the drink, he scoffed and waved his hand dismissively. "This isn't just about the drink," he said loudly, drawing more attention. "It's about how you're handling this job. Maybe you shouldn't be waiting tables if you can't even get the basics right." His tone was harsh, and the words felt like a public attack on her character rather than a complaint about service. The other diners shifted uncomfortably, some staring, others pretending to look at their phones, unsure how to respond. The waitress felt her confidence shake. She had always prided herself on being polite and professional, but this was different. This wasn't a simple mistake. It was an assault on her dignity. The manager, who had been in the kitchen overseeing orders, noticed the commotion. He stepped out, placing a hand on the waitress's shoulder. "It's okay," he said quietly, but the biker saw him and turned his attention. "Who are you to tell me what's okay?" "I demand respect," he shouted. The manager tried to remain calm, explaining that the mistake had been minor and that the waitress was doing her job. But the biker wasn't interested in reason. His voice rose even louder, and he began mocking her further, making comments about her ability and even her appearance. The young waitress felt frozen, unsure whether to continue serving him or to step back. Her heart raced and she felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. Other staff members looked on helplessly. Some had experienced difficult customers before, but this level of aggression was unusual. The other diners, too, were watching now. A few people muttered quietly to themselves, commenting on how rude he was, while others simply avoided eye contact, fearing that intervening might escalate the situation. The young waitress, however, was determined not to let him see her break. She straightened her posture, forced herself to take a deep breath, and continued with her work. Her hands were steady, but inside a storm of emotions churned. She felt anger, shame, and a desperate hope that someone would step in. Despite the fear, she reminded herself of the countless times she had faced rude customers before. She remembered her mother's words often repeated at home. Always be kind even when others are not. Those words were her anchor now. She poured herself a moment of strength and addressed the biker politely. "Sir, I truly apologize for the mistake. I hope you can enjoy your meal now." Her voice was calm, almost serene, and there was a quiet dignity in the way she spoke. But the biker only laughed, louder this time, a deep mocking sound that made some diners flinch. "Dignity?" he said. "You think this is dignity? This is weakness." His words carried not just insult but a challenge, daring her to respond. She remained silent, refusing to rise to the bait. She placed the final items on his table and stepped back, hoping he would leave. Each time she turned away, he made another mocking comment, each one sharper than the last. The diner had grown silent now, the once warm hum of conversation replaced by tense murmurs. Every eye seemed to be on the scene, watching how it would unfold. At this moment, the young waitress realized that this wasn't just about one coffee or one mistake. It was about respect, about being seen as a human being worthy of kindness and patience. She felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her, but she refused to let fear control her actions. She straightened her shoulders, lifted her chin, and reminded herself that she was not alone. Her co-workers were there, the manager was there, and even among the diners there were people who understood the injustice of the situation. As the biker continued to mock her, the waitress took a deep breath, trying to focus on something beyond the immediate fear. She noticed a few children in the diner watching quietly, wide-eyed. She thought about how courage and calmness could set an example for them. She realized that standing her ground, even in small ways, was important. It wasn't just about surviving this moment. It was about showing strength in the face of cruelty, teaching respect not through words but through composure. And just as the tension reached a peak, the diner door opened, letting in a sudden breeze that carried the smell of the street outside. A tall figure entered, someone with a calm, confident presence that immediately drew the attention of several people. The young waitress didn't yet know who he was, but she sensed a shift in the room. The biker, who had been so loud and dominating, seemed to notice the change in energy but didn't yet understand it. The young waitress, still recovering from the emotional strain of the encounter, felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, help had arrived. The young waitress had just finished placing the correct coffee in front of the biker when she retreated to the small space behind the counter to catch her breath. Her heart was still racing and her hands trembled slightly as she wiped them on her apron. The rush of emotions, from fear to embarrassment to frustration, made it hard to think clearly. She leaned against the counter for a moment, closing her eyes and taking slow, deliberate breaths. She knew she had to remain calm, but the humiliation of being mocked in front of so many people still lingered like a heavy weight on her shoulders. Her coworker, who had been watching the scene unfold from a nearby station, approached quietly and placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Hey, it's okay. He's just trying to get a reaction out of you," she whispered. "Don't let him. You're doing fine." The words were kind, but they did little to calm the tight knot in her chest. She forced a small nod, feeling grateful for the support, but still painfully aware that the biker's eyes were fixed on her every move. The diner had gone quiet, the usual hum of conversation replaced by an uneasy silence. Other customers had stopped talking, their attention drawn to the confrontation at the corner table. A few people exchanged worried glances, whispering softly among themselves. The atmosphere felt tense, heavy with anticipation, as if everyone was waiting to see what would happen next. The young waitress realized that she was at the center of this sudden spotlight, and it made her feel both exposed and vulnerable. Despite the discomfort, she reminded herself that she had handled difficult situations before. She had worked in busy restaurants dealing with impatient customers, long hours, and sometimes even rude behavior. She had always tried to maintain her composure, to be polite and professional no matter the circumstances. But this situation felt different. The biker's tone, the volume, and the public nature of the humiliation made it feel personal. It was no longer just about a wrong drink. It was about her dignity, her sense of worth, and the respect she deserved. She took another deep breath and tried to refocus. The manager had stepped closer, standing near the biker's table with a calm expression. "Sir," he said firmly but politely, "there's no need to speak to her that way. She is doing her job and has corrected the mistake. Please enjoy your meal." The biker scoffed, leaning back in his chair, clearly not interested in reasoning. He waved a hand dismissively, as if the manager's words were meaningless. His eyes, however, flicked occasionally to the door, as if expecting someone else to step in, or perhaps just to see if anyone else noticed him. The young waitress, watching this exchange, felt a flicker of doubt. She wondered why more people weren't stepping forward, why no one was confronting the biker about his behavior. It was clear that he was taking advantage of fear, using his size, his loud voice, and the tension in the room to dominate the situation. She thought about how she had often been told to ignore rude people or stay professional no matter what. But this felt like a test of more than just her professionalism. It felt like a test of courage. As she returned to the biker's table to check if he needed anything else, she noticed something she hadn't before: a few small children sitting with their parents watching the scene unfold. Their eyes were wide, filled with curiosity and a bit of fear. She realized that whether she liked it or not, she was setting an example for them. The way she responded could teach them about handling disrespect, about standing strong without resorting to anger. That thought gave her a small sense of empowerment, a reminder that she could rise above the situation, even if she felt small and vulnerable in the moment. While she focused on maintaining her composure, the biker continued to speak, his voice sharp and mocking. "Seriously, this is pathetic," he said. "Can't even get a coffee right. What kind of job is this?" Each word stung, and yet she did not respond with anger. She simply placed a napkin on the table and said softly, "I'm very sorry for the inconvenience. Please enjoy the rest of your meal." Her calmness contrasted sharply with his aggression, and she noticed some of the customers begin to whisper among themselves, surprised at how composed she remained under pressure. Her coworker stayed nearby, ready to step in if things escalated, while the manager maintained a careful distance, watching the situation closely. The young waitress felt a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief that she was not completely alone, and anxiety because the confrontation was far from over. She knew the biker's behavior could continue, and part of her wondered what would happen next. She tried to focus on her work, taking orders from other tables and refilling drinks, but her attention kept drifting back to the biker, to his mocking expression and the tension he brought into the room. Time seemed to stretch as the minutes passed. The biker ate slowly, making occasional comments about the service, each one designed to draw attention to the waitress's mistake. She remained polite, answering questions, taking additional requests, and handling trays with care. She reminded herself constantly that staying calm and composed was her strength. She did not know who had taught her patience, whether it was family, friends, or simply experience, but she clung to it now as a shield against the storm of insults and intimidation. The other diners, meanwhile, began to relax slightly as they realized she was not reacting the way the biker hoped. Some offered quiet words of support to her as they left the counter. A few older customers, perhaps more experienced in dealing with difficult people, nodded subtly or smiled encouragingly, as if acknowledging her strength. Those small gestures, though minor, gave her a sense of validation and reminded her that she was not alone in this. There were people who recognized her dignity and respected her for standing firm. Even as she moved between tables, her mind returned to the biker. She could feel his gaze on her, calculating, trying to provoke a response. She reminded herself that he was acting out of arrogance, not reason, and that responding with anger would only escalate the situation. She thought about all the times she had been taught to stay professional, to treat customers with respect even when they did not deserve it. It was not easy, but it was something she had learned to do instinctively, and now more than ever she needed to rely on that training. As the lunch rush began to settle, a few more customers entered the diner. The atmosphere gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the tension around the biker remained. The waitress continued to serve with quiet determination, carrying trays with precision, refilling coffee cups and taking orders with a polite smile. She noticed that some of the biker's friends who had been sitting at a nearby table were now watching nervously, sensing the uncomfortable energy, but unsure how to intervene. The room was a mix of unease and admiration, people quietly recognizing the courage it took to maintain composure in the face of such behavior. She took a brief moment behind the counter to collect herself again, wiping her hands and exhaling slowly. Her coworker gave her an encouraging smile. "You're doing great. Just a little longer," she said. Those words felt like an anchor, a reminder that she could survive this moment and come out stronger. She straightened her shoulders, adjusted her apron, and returned to the biker's table with renewed focus, ready to continue her work while maintaining her dignity. And then something unexpected happened. A tall figure entered the diner, moving with a calm, confident presence that immediately drew the attention of several customers. The young waitress noticed the shift in energy in the room. The biker, who had been so loud and dominating, glanced toward the entrance, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. The other diners also turned, curious and surprised by the new arrival. For the first time since the confrontation began, the waitress felt a small spark of hope. Perhaps this would change everything. Perhaps someone had arrived who could put an end to the humiliation she had endured. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The lunch rush was nearly over, and soon the diner would return to its usual rhythm. But this moment, tense and uncertain, was far from over. The young waitress knew she had to stay calm, to remain polite and composed, and to carry herself with the quiet strength she had relied on for so many years. Whatever happened next, she resolved to face it with courage, remembering that dignity and respect were worth more than any insult or intimidation. The bell above the diner door jingled, and everyone in the room instinctively looked up. A tall figure entered, moving with a calm confidence that immediately made people notice him. He was dressed casually, but there was a sense of strength and purpose in the way he walked. The young waitress, who had been struggling to keep her composure under the biker's relentless mocking, felt a spark of relief. She did not know who he was, but somehow, his presence made the room feel safer. The biker, who had been so loud and domineering just moments ago, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He glanced toward the entrance, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, but quickly tried to mask it with his usual smug expression. The newcomer scanned the diner calmly, his gaze moving from table to table, taking in the scene with quiet observation. He noticed the young waitress standing tall despite the fear and tension still lingering in her expression. He saw the biker, who was still sitting with a sense of arrogance, trying to assert his control over the room. Something in the way the waitress carried herself caught his attention, not just her professionalism, but the strength she showed despite being belittled and humiliated. He made his way to a table nearby, ordering a coffee and a quick snack, but his presence alone changed the energy in the diner. Conversations that had gone silent during the confrontation began to murmur again, though people still stole glances at the tense corner where the biker and the waitress were locked in their silent battle. Some of the other diners whispered to each other, noticing how the biker seemed a little less confident now. The tall man had a quiet authority, a way of standing that commanded attention without yelling or raising his voice. The young waitress felt a mixture of hope and anxiety. She had been trying to hold herself together for what felt like hours, and the thought that someone might finally intervene was comforting, yet she worried about the consequences. The biker was unpredictable, and she wasn't sure how he would react to a challenge. She reminded herself to stay composed, to continue doing her job and to observe what would happen next. She had learned that patience and calmness were often more powerful than confrontation, especially when facing someone who thrived on aggression. Meanwhile, the biker noticed the newcomer's presence more keenly. His smirk faltered slightly as he tried to maintain his dominance. "Who is this guy?" he muttered under his breath, loud enough for some nearby diners to hear. He tried to ignore him at first, turning his attention back to the waitress and continuing his mocking. "Seriously, you can't even do your job right," he said, his tone sharp and biting. But there was a subtle hesitation now, a crack in his confidence that hadn't been there before. The tall man didn't respond immediately. He simply observed, quietly assessing the situation. He could see that the waitress was struggling but determined not to let fear control her. He noticed the biker's attempts to intimidate everyone around him, and he realized that this was not just about a mistake with an order. It was about power, control, and disrespect. The diner, usually a place of warmth and community, had become a stage for bullying, and he knew that something needed to be done to restore balance. After a few moments, he set down his coffee and approached the biker's table with calm but deliberate steps. His presence alone caused the biker to shift in his chair, his previous confidence waning. "Excuse me," he said, his voice firm but controlled. "I think you need to stop treating her that way." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The biker looked up, surprised that someone had finally spoken up. He opened his mouth to respond, but the tall man continued undeterred. "You've been mocking her for a mistake that anyone could have made," he said, his tone steady. "She's done her best and you're making her feel small for no reason." "That's not right." The biker's jaw tightened. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who stood calmly in front of him, unafraid. The tall man didn't raise his voice or threaten him. He simply spoke with confidence and authority, making it clear that the behavior was unacceptable. The young waitress watched the interaction with a mix of awe and relief. For the first time since the confrontation began, she felt a glimmer of hope. Someone had finally stepped in, someone who could command respect without aggression. She noticed how the other diners, who had been watching quietly, began to relax slightly, emboldened by the intervention. There was a shift in the atmosphere, a sense that the room was no longer under the biker's control. The biker, however, was not ready to give up easily. He leaned back in his chair, attempting to regain his composure. "Who are you to tell me what to do?" he sneered, his voice rising. "I've been coming here for years. I can say whatever I want." The tall man did not flinch. He remained calm, his eyes steady on the biker. "Respect isn't earned by intimidation," he said simply. "It's earned by how you treat people. Right now you're failing." The words were clear, firm, and undeniable. A hush fell over the diner as the exchange continued. Customers watched in silence, some leaning forward in their seats, captivated by the confrontation. The young waitress felt her heartbeat begin to slow slightly, comforted by the fact that someone had her back. She noticed the biker's friends at the nearby table, who had been quietly observing, now exchanging worried glances. They realized that the biker's usual tactics of loudness and threats were not working in this situation. The tall man continued, his voice calm but unwavering. "It's easy to belittle someone when you feel powerful, but real strength comes from treating others with dignity, even when they make mistakes. She didn't deserve your insults, and you know it." The biker's hands fidgeted slightly, a sign that he was feeling the pressure. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out immediately. The authority in the man's tone, combined with his calm presence, was more intimidating than any shouting or anger the biker could muster. The young waitress, watching closely, felt a mix of relief and admiration. She realized that this was the moment she had been waiting for, not just for someone to intervene, but for someone to do it with integrity and respect. She felt a renewed sense of confidence, remembering that she didn't need to fight back with anger or insults. Courage could come in quiet, steady ways, and she was witnessing it firsthand. The tall man looked around the room briefly, making eye contact with other diners, showing that he had their support without needing to say anything. The biker, noticing the subtle shift, finally slumped slightly in his chair. He could feel the eyes of the room on him, and the realization that his behavior was no longer tolerated sank in. His arrogance had faded, replaced by a mix of shame and confusion. He had underestimated the power of calm authority, and now he was faced with the consequences of his actions. The young waitress took a deep breath, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. The confrontation was far from over, but the balance had shifted. The biker's ability to dominate the room had been broken, and she was no longer the sole target of his aggression. She continued to serve other customers with care, feeling the strength of support from the tall man nearby. His presence had changed everything, not through force but through quiet courage and clear principles. The biker, realizing he was outmatched, tried one last attempt at asserting control. "I don't need anyone telling me how to act," he muttered, his voice quieter than before. The tall man, without raising his voice, simply shook his head. "Yes, you do. And it starts with respecting people, starting with her." The words were simple, but they carried undeniable weight. The biker's friends looked at him silently, no longer willing to back his behavior. The tension that had gripped the diner began to dissolve slowly, replaced by a sense of relief and quiet admiration for the way the situation was handled. The young waitress realized that this moment was a turning point. She had endured the insults and humiliation, but now she could see that respect and courage could prevail without anger. The tall man's intervention had not only protected her, but it also demonstrated the power of standing up for what is right, calmly and firmly. She felt a deep sense of gratitude, knowing that sometimes help comes in the form of presence, integrity, and the willingness to speak out when it matters most. As the diner gradually returned to its normal rhythm, the young waitress continued her work, her confidence renewed. She carried herself with quiet dignity, aware that she had faced one of the most challenging moments of her day and had survived it with grace. The tall man, having made his point, returned to his table, his calm presence still a source of comfort and strength. The biker, subdued and humbled, finished his meal quietly, no longer attempting to intimidate anyone. For the first time in hours, the young waitress felt a genuine sense of relief. The tension that had filled the room was lifting, replaced by a renewed sense of normalcy. She realized that courage, integrity, and calm authority could change the course of events in ways she had never imagined. And in that moment, she understood that she had not only survived the confrontation, but had also witnessed a powerful example of how to stand up for oneself and others without resorting to anger or aggression. The atmosphere in the diner had shifted completely. What had been tense and heavy with fear and humiliation was now charged with a quiet sense of authority and moral clarity. The biker, who had once dominated the room with his volume and aggression, now seemed smaller, almost uncertain. He fidgeted in his chair, his bravado fading under the calm yet firm presence of the tall man who had stepped in. The young waitress watched from a safe distance, heart still pounding but feeling a growing sense of relief. For the first time, she realized she wasn't alone in facing the biker's hostility. The tall man stood near the biker's table, speaking directly but without aggression. "It's not too late to make things right," he said. "You can choose to act with respect, or you can continue to humiliate people for no reason. The choice is yours." His words were measured, each one carrying weight without needing to be shouted. The biker's eyes flicked to the young waitress, who met his gaze with calm determination. She held her head high, a silent message that she would not be broken by his words or intimidation. The sight of her courage, combined with the authority of the tall man, seemed to confuse him. For a moment, the biker opened his mouth, probably intending to argue or threaten, but no words came out. The room was silent except for the quiet clinking of dishes and soft murmurs from other diners who had been watching closely. Even the friends he had come with were now unsure of what to do. They had watched him rely on intimidation countless times before, but they could see that this time it wasn't working. The balance had shifted and the biker could feel it. The tall man continued, his tone calm and steady. "Respect isn't something you demand with anger or threats. Respect is earned by how you treat others every single day. Right now you are failing. She doesn't deserve your insults. None of this is about a wrong drink. It's about how you treat people. And that's the real mistake." The biker's jaw tightened as he absorbed the words. He could no longer act as if he were in control. The room itself seemed to reject his arrogance. The young waitress noticed a subtle change in him, a flicker of self-awareness, perhaps even shame. The diner, which had been frozen in tension, slowly began to respond. Some of the regular customers who had been silent now whispered encouragement to the waitress, their voices low but filled with support. A few others shook their heads at the biker's behavior, clearly unimpressed with his attempt to dominate the room. The young waitress felt a small surge of hope. The presence of the tall man had not only defended her, but it had also empowered others to quietly show their approval of dignity and kindness over aggression. The biker shifted uncomfortably in his chair, trying to regain some semblance of control. "I've been coming here for years," he muttered, attempting to assert authority. "No one tells me how to act in a place I choose to come." The tall man did not flinch. "Being here for years doesn't give you the right to treat people poorly," he replied. "No one deserves to be humiliated because of a small mistake. Everyone deserves respect. That's not negotiable." His words were simple, but they carried an undeniable power. The biker's friends looked at him, silently signaling that his behavior was unacceptable. The young waitress standing near the counter watched as the biker struggled to find a response. His face showed confusion and frustration. He had never been challenged like this, not with anger or yelling, but with calm authority and clear principles. It was disorienting for him, because his usual tactics of intimidation and loudness had always worked. Now he realized that respect could not be demanded. It had to be earned through behavior. And in this moment he was confronted with the reality that he had failed. The tall man took a step closer, his posture firm but not threatening. "You can choose to change how you act," he said. "You can apologize and walk out with dignity, or you can leave this diner knowing you embarrassed yourself in front of everyone. The choice is yours." The biker's hands clenched slightly on the table. He looked around, realizing that the other diners were silently judging him, that his friends were no longer defending his behavior, and that the young waitress, the person he had tried to humiliate, remained composed and confident. The weight of the situation pressed on him, and for the first time he felt small and powerless. The young waitress felt a mixture of relief and admiration as she watched. She had endured the biker's insults, kept her composure, and now she was witnessing a powerful lesson in accountability and courage. The tall man's approach had shown her that standing up for someone didn't always mean confrontation or aggression. It could be calm, steady, and morally grounded. She realized that strength wasn't about physical size or loudness. It was about integrity, presence, and the courage to defend what is right. The biker finally opened his mouth, trying to respond, but the words came out weak and uncertain. I didn't mean, His usual confidence had dissolved, replaced by a mix of shame and confusion. The diners leaned in slightly, curious to see what he would do next. Some murmured quietly, sensing that this was the turning point. The young waitress felt a sense of validation, knowing that she had endured this situation with dignity, and now the biker was facing the consequences of his behavior. The tall man nodded slightly, giving the biker a moment to collect himself. "It's okay to admit you were wrong," he said gently but firmly. "Everyone makes mistakes, but part of growing is taking responsibility. Apologize, it's not a weakness, it's a sign of strength." The biker's friends exchanged looks, realizing that their usual tactics of supporting his aggression were no longer effective. The young waitress could see the internal struggle on his face. Pride and arrogance warred with the reality of the situation, and slowly she noticed a subtle change. The biker's voice was quieter now, almost hesitant. I'm sorry," he muttered, barely above a whisper. The room seemed to exhale collectively. The tall man nodded, accepting the apology but making it clear that words alone were not enough. "Apologies are a start," he said. "Actions matter too. Treat people with respect moving forward. That's how you show you mean it." The biker nodded, his demeanor subdued, a far cry from the loud, domineering man who had entered the diner earlier. The young waitress felt a wave of relief. The confrontation, which had begun as a moment of humiliation and fear, was now turning into a lesson in accountability and courage. The biker's attitude had shifted, and the room, once tense, was returning to a sense of normalcy. She continued her work, refilling coffee cups and taking orders, feeling more confident and empowered than she had before. The diners, sensing the resolution, began to relax, some smiling quietly at the young waitress, acknowledging her strength and composure. The tall man gave a final glance around the diner, ensuring that the situation had fully de-escalated. He had not raised his voice, he had not threatened anyone, yet he had successfully restored respect and order. The biker, now humbled, finished his meal quietly, his arrogance replaced by reflection. His friends followed his lead, understanding that their usual tactics were no longer effective. The diner returned to its usual rhythm, the sounds of conversation and clinking dishes gradually filling the space once more. The young waitress, taking a moment behind the counter, felt a deep sense of gratitude and pride. She had faced a challenging situation, endured humiliation, and remained composed throughout. Now she saw the power of calm authority and moral courage in action. She realized that sometimes standing up for oneself and others didn't require shouting or aggression. It required clarity, patience, and integrity. As she returned to serving the remaining customers, she carried herself with quiet dignity, her confidence renewed. She understood that the incident would stay with her, not as a memory of shame, but as a reminder of resilience and the importance of standing strong even when faced with intimidation. The tall man's presence had been more than just intervention. It had been a demonstration of how to face challenges with courage and respect. The diner continued its usual rhythm, but the lesson lingered. The young waitress, her colleagues, and even the diners had witnessed the transformation of a tense, hostile situation into one of accountability and reflection. The biker, once loud and aggressive, had been humbled, and the young waitress had emerged stronger and more confident. She realized that courage often comes quietly, and that the presence of someone willing to stand up for what is right can change everything. For the first time since the incident began, the young waitress allowed herself to breathe fully. She had survived the confrontation, maintained her dignity, and witnessed a powerful example of moral courage. The diner, once tense and fearful, was now filled with quiet admiration and respect. The lesson was clear. Standing up for yourself and others, even in small ways, could make a difference. And sometimes help comes in the form of calm authority and unwavering principles, showing that true strength is not measured by aggression, but by the courage to do what is right. The diner slowly returned to its usual rhythm after the confrontation. The clinking of plates and the low hum of conversation filled the space once more, replacing the tense silence that had dominated for what felt like hours. The biker, who had spent the past hour trying to assert dominance, was now quiet, subdued, and reflective. His friends followed suit, sensing that the lesson had been learned. The young waitress, still feeling the adrenaline from the earlier events, continued her work with renewed confidence. Each step she took, each tray she carried, reminded her that she had faced a challenge and come through it with dignity. She moved between tables with practiced ease, taking orders, refilling drinks, and smiling at the customers. But this time there was a difference. She walked taller, carried herself with a quiet strength, and felt a deep sense of self-assurance she hadn't felt before. The intervention of the tall man had not only protected her, but had also given her a powerful example of courage and respect. She realized that standing up for oneself didn't always require shouting or aggression. Sometimes it required calm determination, presence, and moral clarity. The diners, who had witnessed the entire scene, began to show subtle signs of support. A few regulars gave her encouraging smiles as she passed, while some whispered quietly to their companions about how composed she had been under pressure. Even the children in the diner, who had been watching wide-eyed earlier, now looked at her with admiration. She understood that her actions, even without raising her voice or responding with anger, had left an impression. She had modeled resilience, patience, and courage for everyone in the room. The biker, now finished with his meal, looked around as if seeing the diner for the first time. The confidence and control he had tried to assert earlier were gone. He realized that his behavior had not only failed to intimidate, but had also earned the quiet disapproval of those around him. The young waitress noticed him glance at her briefly, his expression a mix of guilt and recognition. She did not scowl or return anger. Instead, she maintained her calm, collected demeanor, showing that she was unshaken by his past insults. The tall man, who had been observing the scene from his table, finally stood to leave. Before exiting, he gave a small nod to the young waitress, a gesture of acknowledgement and encouragement. It was a silent way of saying, "You did well. You handled this with strength." She felt a wave of gratitude and relief. His intervention had been more than just stopping the biker. It had shown her the power of standing up for what is right, and how calm, consistent courage could transform a tense situation. As the tall man walked toward the door, the young waitress felt a sense of closure. The confrontation that had started with